The phone screen was still warm when I picked it up. My banking app, already open, the way I'd left it 20 minutes earlier. One transfer, pending. $52,000. Not sent yet. Not final. A detail nobody in my family had bothered to ask about because nobody in my family had ever needed to understand how money actually moves. Above the transfer sat a message I hadn't answered. I didn't need to reread it. I already knew every word. My hands weren't shaking. I want to be clear about that because everyone assumes they were. They weren't. I sat very still, the way I do when a column of numbers doesn't add up, and I looked at that pending amount for exactly as long as it took me to decide. Then I put my thumb over the button. I hadn't pressed it yet. If you're new here, welcome. You already know the shape of these stories, even if the details change. Someone gives everything. Someone else decides that giving was owed, not chosen. And somewhere along the way, one quiet person starts keeping the receipts without saying a word about it. There's no yelling in these stories. There doesn't need to be. So let me tell you how I got to that phone screen, that pending transfer, that message I hadn't answered yet. It starts, like most of these do, with a phone call. I'm a forensic accountant, 12 years now. I spend my days finding the half-truth buried inside someone else's numbers, the invoice that doesn't quite match the delivery date, the expense that's technically legal and still a lie. I'm good at it. I've built a career on the simple, stubborn belief that the numbers don't lie, even when the people attached to them do. My life, if you looked at it the way I look at everything else, was in order. A one-bedroom apartment I'd owned outright for 3 years, a car with no payments left on it, and a savings account I called my float, not an emergency fund, not a cushion, a float, the way a business keeps enough cash on hand to survive a bad quarter. I'd built that number slowly, on purpose, the same way I built everything. $81,000 as of the morning my sister called. Here's what I never did, not once in 12 years of reconciling other people's books. I never ran the numbers on my own family. I could look at a stranger's spreadsheet and find the one line that didn't belong. I could not, apparently, look at my own life and ask why I was always the one covering the shortfall. That kind of scrutiny, the kind I got paid for, stopped at my front door. Inside it, I was just a sister, just a daughter, not an auditor. I've thought about why since. I think it's because auditing requires distance, and I had none. You don't reconcile the people who raised you. You just keep showing up, keep balancing whatever needs balancing, and call it love instead of what it actually was, which was an account that never once ran the other direction. That's the account I want to walk you through, not the money first. The math came later. It starts with who got believed and who got called reliable instead. My sister is 2 years younger than me. Her name is Renee. Growing up, if you'd asked our parents to describe each of us in one word, they'd have said Renee was warm and I was reliable. I used to think those were compliments of equal weight. It took me until my 30s to understand that only one of those words gets you carried, and it isn't reliable. I don't say that with any heat. I'm just stating what I observed, the way I'd note a discrepancy in a ledger. Renee missed her curfew in high school, and it was because she had a big heart and trusted the wrong people. I came home 4 minutes late once, at 17, and my father waited up to tell me trust was earned. When Renee dropped out of her first semester of college, it was a brave decision to find herself. When I changed my major sophomore year, my mother asked, more than once, if I understood what I was throwing away. For our joint graduation, Renee finished 2 years after me, on a different timeline entirely, but our parents combined the celebrations to save money and took her to Cancun. I got a card. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only thing I trust. The card had $40 in it and a note that said they were proud of how independent I'd become. Independent. That was the word they used for a daughter they'd stopped budgeting for. I noticed these things the way I notice everything, which is to say I filed them. I didn't make a scene. I've never once made a scene, not as a teenager, not as an adult. I told myself it wasn't favoritism. It was just that Renee needed more and I needed less, and needing less isn't a punishment. It's a kind of freedom. I believed that for a long time. What I actually was, if I'm honest with the numbers, was the family's float. The reserve they didn't have to think about because I never asked them to. When Renee needed a deposit back on an apartment, I was the one who got the call first, not because I was closest to her, but because I was the one who'd say yes without making anyone explain themselves. When our mother needed help with a bill, she called me before she called Renee because Renee, warm as she was, could not be relied upon to actually show up with the money. I answered every one of those calls, every single one, and somewhere in the last 5 years, without either of us deciding it out loud, Renee and I stopped talking except through the family group chat. No falling out, no fight, just a slow, mutual quiet, the kind that happens when two people no longer have a reason to reach for each other directly. So when my phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and it was Renee's name on the screen, not a text, not a message in the group chat, but an actual call, I felt something close to surprise. It had been over a year. I answered on the second ring. She was already crying. I need your help. That was the first full sentence, after the crying settled enough to form words. Not hello. Not it's been a while. I need your help. I sat down at my kitchen table, phone against my ear, and listened the way I listen to a client explain a set of numbers that don't quite add up. Not doubting yet, just paying attention. There was a mass, she said, in her abdomen. The surgeon wanted it out within the week before it could grow into something worse. Insurance would cover part of it, but not enough, not fast enough, and the hospital needed a deposit before they'd schedule the date. She said the number in pieces, the way you say something you've rehearsed saying gently and still can't get out cleanly. $80,000. I noticed, even then, the shape of how she said it. The pauses fell in the same places a person's pauses fall when they've said the sentence out loud before, maybe in a mirror, maybe to someone else first, working out where the breath should catch. I'm not saying I didn't believe her. I'm saying I noticed it the way you notice a font that doesn't quite match the rest of a document and you file it and you keep reading. I don't have anyone else, she said. Mom and Dad don't have it. I know we haven't talked. I know this is a lot to ask. I wouldn't call if I had another option. I didn't ask her why, of everyone, she'd called me first after a year of silence. I didn't ask to see the surgeon's estimate or the hospital's billing letter or anything at all. I want to be honest about that because it matters later. I didn't ask because asking has never been the currency of our family. Paying is. Send me the hospital's information, I said. I'll take care of it today. She said thank you 4 times in a row, each one a little louder than the last, and then she said something I'd hear again, later, in a very different context. Family helps family, no matter what. I remember thinking at the time that it sounded like a comfort. It would take me 2 more weeks to understand it as a policy. I hung up, opened my banking app, and pulled up my float. $81,000, built one careful deposit at a time over 3 years. I looked at it for exactly as long as it takes to accept that a number you've protected is about to become a number you no longer have. Then I called the hospital's billing office myself, got the account details, and began moving the money the only way I know how to move anything. Carefully, traceably, and without a single question asked out loud. The hospital's billing office was used to lump sums, wired once and forgotten. That isn't how I move money, not even in a crisis, maybe especially not in a crisis. So instead of authorizing the full $80,000 in a single transfer, I set it up as 2 phases, the way I'd structure a settlement for a client who needed to protect themselves while still meeting a deadline. Phase 1, $28,000, went out that afternoon, enough to secure the surgery date and cover the first wave of pre-op costs. Phase 2, $52,000, I scheduled as a held transfer, authorized but not finalized, tied to the hospital's confirmation that the procedure had actually gone ahead as described. I told myself this was ordinary caution. Any accountant would tell you the same thing. Verify before you release the larger sum. I also knew, somewhere underneath that reasoning, that I was protecting myself in a way I hadn't been asked to and hadn't mentioned to anyone. That's who I am. I don't send money into the dark, not even for family. Especially not for family, if I'm being honest, because family is exactly where people stop asking for documentation. I saved everything. The confirmation number from the first transfer, time-stamped 2:47 p.m. The email from the hospital's billing coordinator acknowledging receipt, time-stamped the next morning. The scheduled authorization for the second transfer, sitting in my app under pending, with its own confirmation number and its own quiet paper trail. I didn't do this because I suspected anything yet. I did it because it's the only way I know how to hold money, mine or anyone else's, as a set of records that can answer for themselves later, regardless of what anyone remembers or claims. I texted Renee once that evening, letting her know the first payment had gone through and the surgery date was secured. She sent back a single line. Thank you seriously. You have no idea what this means. I did have an idea, actually. I had 80,000 ideas, itemized. Then nothing. No update on the surgery date. No confirmation it had happened. No call to say how she was recovering or whether she was recovering or whether the mass had turned out to be what the surgeon expected. I told myself she was resting. I told myself surgery recovery doesn't leave much room for phone calls, and that not everyone processes gratitude out loud, and that I, of all people, shouldn't need to be thanked to know I'd done the right thing. 2 weeks passed like that. I didn't chase her for updates because chasing isn't something I do either. I just kept the second transfer sitting there, pending, unreleased, waiting on a confirmation that never came from the one place it was supposed to come from, her. I want you to hold on to that detail. $52,000 authorized but not sent, sitting exactly where I'd left it, time-stamped and traceable, while 2 weeks went by in complete silence. I didn't know yet why I'd need it. I only knew I had it. My cousin Dana is the only person on my mother's side who still texts me directly, outside the family group chat. The way people used to talk to each other before group chats became the family's preferred way of avoiding conversations. Dana was never loud about her loyalty. She just showed up consistently, in small ways, a birthday text on the actual day, a check-in after a bad week at work, nothing that asked for anything back. 2 weeks and 1 day after I sent the first payment, Dana texted me at 9:14 in the evening. No greeting. Just, I don't know if I should send this. Then, a minute later, another message. But I think you deserve to see it. I remember exactly where I was. Standing in my kitchen, dish towel still in one hand, the phone propped against a mug on the counter. I didn't respond right away. Dana isn't someone who exaggerates, isn't someone who inserts herself into things for attention. If she was hesitating, it meant whatever she had was something she'd already sat with, turned over, decided was worse than the risk of sending it. You have to understand, silence had become the family's whole language by then. 2 weeks of no update from Renee. No word from my parents, who I hadn't spoken to directly either, though I assumed, wrongly, that they simply didn't want to intrude on Renee's recovery. Everyone quiet. In that particular way, families go quiet when something is happening that they've collectively agreed not to mention to the one person still holding the bill. Dana wasn't part of that agreement, whatever it was. Send it, I typed back. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then a single image loaded onto my screen, a screenshot, cropped at the edges the way people crop things when they're deciding how much context to include and how much to leave out. I didn't open it right away. I set the phone face down on the counter first, picked the dish towel back up, folded it once, set it down too. I don't know why I needed those few seconds. Maybe some part of me already understood that once I looked at it, there would be no version of my life where I hadn't. Then I picked the phone back up. The screenshot was from the family group chat, the one I'd been quietly muted in for months because I got tired of scrolling past conversations that never included me directly. Dana had cropped it to show the sender, the timestamp, and the message itself, nothing more. Renee's name at the top, the date. 3 days after I'd sent the first $28,000. And below that, in her own words, no ambiguity, no context that could soften it. She's dead to me. Always has been. Someone else in the chat, I still don't know who, Dana had cropped that part away, had apparently asked something like, "Isn't she helping with your surgery, though?" And Renee's reply, sent 40 minutes later, was the one Dana chose to include. Some people help because they need to feel important. Doesn't mean anything's changed. I read it twice. Then a third time, slower, the way you reread a figure on a page when you need to be certain you copied it correctly and it isn't a trick of the light. My hands did not shake. I want to be exact about that because it would be easy to tell this story as though I broke down at the kitchen counter, and I didn't. What I noticed instead was a kind of stillness settling into my chest, cold and specific, the same stillness I feel when I find the one line in a client's books that explains every other line around it. Not shock, recognition. I did not call Renee. I did not call my mother, or my father, or Dana, though I did eventually thank her, briefly, for sending it. I did not type anything into the group chat. I have never once, in my life, resolved anything by raising my voice into a room, and I wasn't going to start over a message that had already told me everything I needed to know. Instead, I set down the dish towel, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my banking app. There it was, exactly where I'd left it 2 weeks earlier. A pending transfer, $52,000, authorized but never released, tied to a confirmation from the hospital that had never actually arrived, because I'd never chased it. I looked at that number for a long moment. Not because I was deciding what to do with it, I already knew. I was looking at it because I wanted to remember precisely what it felt like to hold something that large in my hand and understand, finally, that I didn't owe it to someone who'd already decided, in writing, that I owed her nothing back. My thumb hovered over the screen. Before I tell you what I did next, I want to ask you something, because I already know some of you are sitting with this exact feeling right now. Have you ever given everything you had to someone only to find out later that they'd already written you off behind your back? Not a fight, not a falling out, just a quiet, private cruelty, sitting underneath a very public request for help. Tell me in the comments, I read everyone, because here's what I did with what I knew, and it wasn't what anyone expected. 2 days after I saw the screenshot, my mother called, not Renee, My mother, which should have told me something on its own, since my mother rarely calls anyone when a text would do. "We just wanted to see how you're doing," she said, and I let the pause sit there long enough to hear what was underneath it. My father was on the line too, quiet, the way he always is when my mother is doing the talking for both of them. I said I was fine. I did not say I know what Renee wrote. I wanted to hear where this call was actually going before I decided whether to tell them I already knew. It didn't take long. My mother mentioned the surgery had gone well, mentioned it the way you'd mention weather in passing, as though I should already have known, as though someone had surely kept me updated. She mentioned Renee was still recovering, still needed rest, still needed, she said, not to be stressed about anything financial right now. Then she arrived at the actual reason for the call, the way people always do, 3 or 4 sentences after they claim they don't have one. "The second payment," she said. "Renee wanted to make sure it's still coming. The hospital's been asking." I sat with that for a moment. 4 seconds, maybe 5, long enough that my father filled the silence himself. "You know how she is," he said. "She doesn't always say the right thing when she's scared, but family helps family, no matter what. That's just who we are." There it was, the exact phrase delivered secondhand on behalf of a woman who hadn't called me herself, who hadn't confirmed her own surgery to me directly, who hadn't said thank you since a single text 2 weeks earlier, and who had told an entire group chat that I was dead to her while her family used her own words to ask me for the rest of the money. I noticed all of it. I filed all of it. I did not raise my voice because I never do, and because I understood, sitting there at my kitchen table, that whatever I said next would either close this account quietly or leave it open for them to keep drawing from indefinitely. "How is she feeling?" I asked. "Physically, since the surgery." "Better every day," my mother said, relieved, mistaking the question for softening. "She's just worried about the money situation." I let another pause sit, shorter this time. Then I asked the only question that actually mattered. "Has she mentioned anything else she's said about me recently? To anyone?" There was a silence on the other end of the line that told me more than an answer would have. My mother said, carefully, that she wasn't sure what I meant. My father said nothing at all. "I think you should ask her that yourselves," I said, "before we talk about the rest of the money." I hung up before either of them could answer. Renee called me herself 2 hours later. No crying this time. Her voice had the flat, defensive edge of someone who'd been told, by our mother, that something needed to be addressed. "Mom said you were asking weird questions," she said, "about what I've supposedly said about you." "Not supposedly," I said. "I have it in writing." There was a pause on her end, the kind of pause I recognized because it was the same rehearsed cadence from the first phone call, only now working in the opposite direction, trying to find the sentence that would make this go away instead of the one that would bring the money in. "I don't know what you think you have," she said. So I told her. I read it to her exactly as it appeared on my screen, no embellishment because the words didn't need any. "She's dead to me, always has been. I gave her the date it was sent. I gave her the exact time, 40 minutes after someone in the chat had asked whether I was helping with her surgery. I did not raise my voice reading it. I read it the way I'd read a figure off a page in a deposition, flat and exact, because I wanted her to understand that I wasn't reacting to it anymore. I was simply reporting it back to her. She started to say it wasn't what it sounded like, that she'd been overwhelmed, scared about the surgery, that people say things in group chats they don't mean. I let her get most of the way through that before I said the next thing. "I want to tell you something about the second payment," I said. "The $52,000. "Right," she said, quicker now, the fear audible underneath the defensiveness. "That's why Mom called. The hospital's been—" "It was never a single transfer," I said. "I structured it in 2 phases. The first one went through the day I said it would. The second one I held, authorized but not released, pending confirmation the surgery had actually happened as described." I paused, 4 seconds, maybe 5, the same pause I'd learned to trust. "That message of yours was sent the same day I authorized that hold. Same day, Renee. While the money was still sitting there, waiting on a confirmation you never sent me." Silence. "So this morning," I said. "Before Mom called, I canceled it." I heard something catch in her breath. The sound of a person realizing a door they assumed would always be open had already been closed behind them, quietly, without them noticing the moment it happened. "You can't just—" she started. "I can," I said. "It was never sent. It was authorized and held, which means it was mine to release or mine to take back, and I took it back. There's a full paper trail. Every timestamp lines up. I'm not telling you this to argue with you. I'm telling you because you asked, through Mom, whether it was still coming. It isn't." Family helps family. she said, quieter now, almost pleading. The same 4 words she'd used on the very first call. The same 4 words our father had repeated back to me 2 days earlier, as though repetition alone made them true. Family helps family, I said. No matter what you say about them behind their back, apparently. I checked. You're right. So I stopped. I let that sit on the line between us. I didn't need to say anything else. The math had already said it for me. $28,000 gone, $52,000 returned to an account she would never see the inside of, and one message, time-stamped and permanent, that could no longer be talked back into meaning something softer than what it said. She was still talking when I ended the call evenly, without slamming anything, without raising my voice even once. 2 minutes later, my phone started ringing again, and this time, it didn't stop. The calls came for 2 days straight. Renee first, then my mother, then my father, then Renee again. Each version of the story slightly softer than the last, the way a story gets sanded down each time it's told to someone new. It wasn't what it looked like. It was taken out of context. She'd been in pain, on medication, not thinking clearly. By the third call, she wasn't denying she'd written it anymore. She was just asking me not to hold one bad moment against a lifetime of being sisters. I didn't argue with any of it. There was nothing left to argue. The message existed, time-stamped, unedited, sitting in a screenshot that couldn't be talked back into meaning something gentler. The transfer existed too, canceled, documented, returned to an account she'd never touch. Paperwork doesn't soften with repetition the way a story does. That was the whole point of keeping it. My mother tried once more on the last call to invoke the phrase herself. Family helps family, she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I told her I understood what the phrase meant to her. I told her it meant something different to me now, and that meaning wasn't something I was willing to pretend my way back out of. But I didn't close every door. I want to be honest about that, because this isn't a story about cutting someone off cleanly and calling it justice. I told Renee in our last conversation that I wasn't interested in reconciliation built on an apology for getting caught. But if she ever wanted to sit down and actually account for what our relationship had been, not what we told each other it was, but what it actually was, honestly, on both sides, I'd be willing to have that conversation. Once, whenever she was ready for it. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no either. She just went quiet, the way our whole family goes quiet when something true has finally been placed in front of them and nobody's ready to pick it up yet. I let the silence stand. I've gotten good at that. I think about that float differently now. I used to believe its whole purpose was to be ready at any moment to cover someone else's shortfall without being asked twice. I don't believe that anymore. A float exists so you can survive a bad quarter, not so someone else can spend it and call you dead to them in the same breath. I closed that account the only way I know how, quietly, with the paperwork in order, without raising my voice once. Some debts get forgiven, some just get accurately recorded and left there, finished. If you've ever carried someone who never once carried you, I'd like to hear about it. Tell me what it cost you and what you finally did with the truth once you saw it clearly. I'll read everyone.